So I just watched Gladiator 2. And to be honest, this isn't the second time I'm watching this, but I think it was I wasn't planning on originally watching it twice, but it just kind of worked out that like my friends and the people that I went with, they both ended up wanting to see it. But it worked out because it kind of gave me time to sit with the story a little bit more before I filmed a reaction. And in some ways it kind of helps solidify it. So I will say there are things that I like and there are things that I didn't quite work for me in Gladiator 2. So it's just a sort of mixed sort of like feelings or reactions. Starting off with the stuff that I love. Obviously, I loved the acting. Like the acting is fantastic. I think there's so many articles and like reactions about Denzel's character in particular because he really nailed that choice in acting. Because he could have easily been just like not as charismatic if in someone else's hands. And Denzel really kind of makes you, in a way, kind of root for the villain in some ways because you empathize with his like backstory, the fact that he was a former slave and he's now in a position of power, and this is kind of his revenge story on like the empire that like made him a slave. So like in a way you kind of root for him, and he's also so methodical. His character is so methodical and so like cunning and witty, and you can see it in the moments that Denzel chooses to play like the charismatic person as well as the kind of the calculative one who's watching and observing. So like there were so many moments where you just saw how brilliant he was at like kind of like pulling the strings. So you kind of end up like, to be honest, I'm kind of like I can see his point and I kind of am engaged if he wins. Um, and then you have characters like Pedro's character, who honestly was such a bit of a scene stealer for me because I did not expect for us to love that character so quickly. Because when the first time you see him, he is waging war against the main character. However, then you get the reasoning behind it, his own reluctance and like distaste for war, which makes you empathize with this, and how beloved and kind of still honorable he is. Like in a lot of ways, he carries the spirit of Maximus with that same sort of honor and integrity that he like moves with. Not so much when he's like overthrowing government other cities, but the fact that he's doing it for his wife, I think is you can respect that in some sort of way. And then you can also respect the fact that he was like, oh well, I had enough of this and these bloodthirsty twins. So um, you end up rooting for him. So, but I also understand why his death needed to happen because that was the huge catalyst that kind of changed everything, even in Paul's character's like journey, because it was really about like revenge against like the general, and then the realization that he is just a symptom of a larger sort of problem of like Rome's bloodthirstiness and like the fact that like they're under a rule with people who don't care, and at the same time people are willing to step over one another to like get their strength. So it really was a symptom of like kind of like the disease that infestors Rome, which I think he mentions too earlier in the film. He's like, the city is diseased, and that's so accurate because like that's actually what he's fighting. He chooses to fight against at the end, the smaller symptoms of it, but he wants to be kind of the cure, which is I think very sweet and like great, and I kind of like that part. Um, who else? I also really love the acting of the mother. She's fantastic, but obviously we knew that from the first one. And Ravi, he was a small favorite as well of mine. And I will give like obviously Ridley Scott. You don't need to say it. He's a great director. I love some of his choices in these shots, where he like chooses to go upfront and graphic with like the gore, but also the poverty. Like he makes it very clear there is like there is chaos, and like Rome, it's not like the healthy city. Even though these people are living in wealth, there's also these people who are just camped out, homeless, like without a home or without food or money, in the streets of Rome as well. So you can sort of feel the tension of the city itself. So that was amazing. The thing that I kind of bumped on, and it's the only little thing. So I know with sequels, there's a strong desire to tie it to the first one, to the original, because you want to make sure, like, yeah, this is what the people came for, this is what they loved. So it's sometimes a bit of a delicate balance, I feel, to do that, because sometimes if you don't tie it enough, they're like, well, why'd you make a sequel? This has nothing to do with the original, um, etc., etc. But then sometimes if you tie it too much, it's like, well, why'd you make the sequel? You basically made the same movie with the same with the different cast. So I feel this veered a little bit more like it was too much, there's too many ties to the original. And the biggest thing that I personally bumped on, especially because like Maximus's character, which is Russell Crowe in the first one, his character arc was all about honor and strength, as they kept repeating in this movie as well. But he was also he was, what I thought was he was very loyal to his wife and son. Because they were killed, and then he dreams of like a life, or like he dreams of death, to be reunited with them in death. But he's also unwilling to like die at the moment until like their killer is like kind of taken down. So, but he was also very like loyal to that idea. So for him to suddenly have a son and to find out that Lucius was always his son with the with, I forgot her name, it totally blanked on me, but with the mother, is like, it was startling. I kind of like bumped on that because I'm like, that's not how I pictured your character. Like, is it like that he had an affair, or is it like a friend of mine tried to like really explain it, being like, oh, like this was way before his marriage and stuff like that, and like if you look at the flashbacks, his son is very young when they died, so it seems like they had the affair. Obviously she was still engaged, like in the arranged marriage, and then he went and married someone else. But like, that's such a stretch. I will give it to her, but that is such a stretch. So I can't really buy it. So the fact that it feels more like it was like an affair or a fling that he happened to have kind of bumps me the wrong way, considering his character arc. To be honest, like I would have been more interested if like he was just maybe the mentor, like obviously like Lucius, we see his character in the first one. If he was just inspired by Maximus or wished that he was his father and just carried those values out throughout his journey, that would have been enough. I also felt like the fact that they kind of echoed his like sort of like backstory, in the sense that he was a man of like considerable, like a kind of a general that is then captured. His wife is killed in front of him, and then he's captured and become a gladiator, and then fights for kind of revenge. Initially I kind of bumped on that a little bit because I was like, oh, again, this feels very much, we're walking a familiar path. I agree, though the fact that he doesn't kill the general and like it deviates is like very interesting. But I wish they almost just started with like the lost heir sort of trope. Like it could have been, so I'm just spitballing here. Obviously I'm not the writer of the movie, and the writers did a fantastic job. 100% kudos to them. It's a very difficult thing to tackle, like a sequel, especially of a beloved movie like this 20 years later. But like I think, and so again, just spitballing, I think it would have been kind of interesting, instead of like Maximus as the father. Maximus was just like, again, like I said, like the mentor and the ideal that the son had like lived up to. But it would have been interesting if like the actual father was Pedro's character, and like they were both like looking for this son, and maybe that's part of also the reason why he like went and conquered all these places to try and like find his son, which he couldn't, he didn't. And then it would have been really interesting to find out that like, one, Lucius doesn't actually know that that's his real father, because like the identity has always been hidden. And two, for Pedro then to find out when the mom finds out that like, oh, this is your son has been is a gladiator, and it's because of him launching that war, him defeating him at that, like he became a slave in the system, or a gladiator now who has no freedom. I think that could have been really interesting for him to then grapple with that sort of like information, and then like basically then, instead of him choosing to lay down his life for the love of his wife and the respect that he had for his wife's son's bio dad, it would have been even more moving if he's like, I love you, you're my son, I know that I caused you, like you hate me, but I love you, and he just like gives up his life for his son as well. I think that would have been also incredibly moving, and that would have had some sort of like impact to Lucius, who was like, oh, this man who I didn't think was my man, who I considered my enemy this whole time, and I considered Maximus my father, is this man who was my enemy is actually my father. Again, that's kind of like a Star Wars vibe. It's like, look, I am your father. But like it would have worked in that sense, that like, oh, my father is still honorable. He's still very loving towards my wife. He's still like someone I could respect. So that would have been, frankly, I think, kind of an interesting sort of like segue into that. I will also say, like, I do like the fact that like he would. At first, I was kind of like, oh, why is he donning like Maximus's like armor? I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. But when he was being stabbed by like Denzel Washington in the water, and the fact that it was his father's strength that was protecting him, I was kind of like, okay, that's a nice little moment there. I think it could have still worked though if he just took Maximus as his like mentor, because there's so many there are scenes of Lucius and Maximus like interacting in Gladiator one. It like based off of what you can see in the flashbacks. I don't remember the movie that much, but like there are interactions between the two of them. So that would have been really great. Also, the other thing I bumped on was the ending was a little bit weird to me, because he was like, he touched the sand and he was like, "Speak to me, father," and then there's just a hand touching the wheat. I would have just been like, what? That like there was like no payoff to that. "Speak to me, my father." It's not like Russell. I was expecting Russell Crowe to pop out, which is I guess would have like been a kind of like cute little treat for the audience at the end. But also understand why he didn't show up and like why they wouldn't have done that. But I think then they would have had to have a different sort of ending, like because I feel like it called for something which there was no answer for. Unless they're doing a third movie, which, they could be, but, like, I don't know how the third movie would go. Is it, like, his rise into power of being an emperor? And I'm like, how's that a Gladiator story? But that's not for me to figure out. That's for the writers. I mean, that's if they do a third movie. But overall, it is fun. I think if you're highly attached to the first movie, you might just be protective of it when you're watching it and might bump a little bit on some of the choices. I think you'll still enjoy it, because I definitely did. I still enjoyed a lot of like the story and the action and the character acting. But I think if you have no attachment, or like you're not as familiar or remember this first movie as much, you will just enjoy it, because it is a good story. So anyways, let me know what you thought in the comments. If you agree or disagree, just message. I'm curious to see what everyone thought.